In the mountains of Lebanon sits a stone that weighs roughly as much as 3 fully loaded Boeing 747 aircraft. It's not a natural rock formation. It's a single, deliberately cut block of limestone, quarried by human hands. Still lying exactly where it was left more than 2,000 years ago, because whoever was moving it apparently couldn't finish the job. Nearby, 3 more stones just as impossible sit stacked into the foundation wall of an ancient temple, each one weighing somewhere between 750 and 800 tons. To put that in perspective, the largest stones used to build the Great Pyramid of Giza weigh around 80 tons. These stones are nearly 10 times heavier, and unlike the pyramid blocks, they weren't stacked into a pile. They were lifted, carried, and precisely fitted into a wall. 19th-century American writer Mark Twain visited this site and called its history a sealed book. More than 150 years later, it still is. He wrote, in his own travel account of the visit, that the ruins stood as a wonder whose origin might never be fully answered, a line that has aged with unusual accuracy. Given how much of the mystery remains genuinely unresolved even now, in an era of satellite imaging, structural modeling, and modern archaeological science. This is Baalbek. And what makes it genuinely different from most ancient mysteries you've heard of is this: we know exactly who built the temple standing on top of these stones. We just aren't entirely sure anyone knows who built the platform underneath it. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why that distinction matters, and why a site this staggering in scale has somehow managed to stay far less discussed than it deserves to be. To understand why this site has puzzled researchers for centuries, you first need to understand just how long people have been building on this exact spot. Baalbek sits in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, a fertile stretch of land between 2 mountain ranges that has been continuously inhabited since at least 9000 BCE, making it one of the longest continuously significant locations in the entire Near East. The site's oldest known name connects it to Baal, a major deity worshipped across the ancient Phoenician world. And archaeological evidence suggests some form of temple or sacred site existed here long before any of the structures still standing today. When Alexander the Great's successors took control of the region, they renamed the city Heliopolis, City of the Sun, and began expanding it into a major religious center. Later, when the Romans absorbed the region into their empire, they inherited a site that already carried centuries of accumulated religious significance. And they set about building one of the largest, most ambitious temple complexes anywhere in their empire on top of it. Construction of the Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek began sometime around 27 BCE, and by the time it was finished, it stood as one of the largest religious structures the Roman world ever built. Its remaining 6 standing columns today are, on their own, taller than most buildings constructed anywhere in the ancient world. But it's not the visible Roman temple that's generated the most debate among archaeologists and historians for the past 2 centuries. It's what the temple was built on top of. That transition point, where recognizable Roman craftsmanship gives way to something considerably rougher, heavier, and harder to explain, is where this story stops being straightforward architectural history and starts becoming a genuine, still unresolved mystery. Beneath the visible ruins of the Roman temple lies a raised stone platform. And embedded within that platform's western retaining wall are 3 stones known collectively as the Trilithon, Greek for 3 stones. Each one measures roughly 19 meters long, about 4 meters high, and 4 meters thick. Each is estimated to weigh somewhere between 750 and 800 metric tons. They sit stacked directly on top of a lower course of foundation stones that are themselves enormous by any ordinary standard, some individually weighing over 300 tons on their own. To put those numbers into terms that actually mean something, the largest mobile cranes in operation anywhere in the world today, using the most advanced hydraulic lifting technology available, typically max out somewhere around 1,200 to 1,600 tons of lifting capacity under ideal, controlled conditions, and that's with modern steel cabling, counterweights, and engineering that didn't exist anywhere on Earth 2,000 years ago. Even with that modern capacity, engineers today would still need to carefully plan the exact lifting angle, ground stability and rigging configuration before attempting to move a stone this heavy, meaning that even a hypothetical modern attempt to replicate this exact lift wouldn't be a simple, routine operation. Moving a 750-ton stone with Roman-era technology, over any meaningful distance, and then lifting it several meters into precise position atop an existing wall, is a problem that still doesn't have a fully agreed-upon engineering answer. And the Trilithon isn't even the most extreme example at this site. A short distance away, inside the ancient quarry the stones were originally cut from, lie several more blocks that were apparently abandoned mid-extraction, never fully separated from the bedrock. Or separated but never moved. The largest of these, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, or Hajar al-Hibla in Arabic, is estimated to weigh somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 tons, making it very likely the single largest hewn stone block in human history. Its local name comes from an old legend claiming that only a pregnant woman possessed the strength needed to move it, a piece of folklore that, whatever its origin, captures something true about just how implausible its scale genuinely is. A short distance away sits another, sometimes called the Stone of the South, estimated at as much as 1,650 tons when fully accounting for the surrounding rock it remains partially attached to. These quarry stones were never moved anywhere. They sit exactly where they were originally cut, as if the workers simply stopped, mid-project, and walked away, leaving behind a physical record of ambition that appears to have outpaced what was actually achievable, even for builders skilled enough to move the 3 Trilithon stones successfully. This is where Baalbek's real mystery begins, and it's a more nuanced question than most documentaries about this site tend to present it as. Nobody seriously disputes that the visible temple, the columns, the ornate carvings, the recognizable architectural style, was built by Roman engineers, using well-documented Roman construction techniques, during the well-recorded historical period when Rome controlled this region. That part of the story isn't mysterious at all. What's genuinely debated is the platform underneath it, specifically, whether Roman engineers quarried and placed these 3 stone and 1,000-ton megaliths themselves, using techniques advanced even by Roman standards, or whether they discovered, and simply built on top of, a pre-existing megalithic foundation left behind by an earlier civilization whose identity and methods have since been lost. The case for full Roman construction rests on solid historical ground. Roman engineers were, by any measure, extraordinarily capable. They built aqueducts spanning entire regions, road networks across 3 continents, and monumental architecture that still stands today across the former empire. Some historians argue that a civilization capable of building the Colosseum and Roman aqueduct systems was entirely capable of engineering a solution to moving and placing stones this large, even if the specific method used has since been lost to history because it simply wasn't considered noteworthy enough to record in detail at the time. This argument carries real weight. Roman engineering achievements elsewhere in their empire are exceptionally well documented, and the sheer scale of infrastructure they successfully completed across 3 continents demonstrates a civilization with genuinely advanced logistical capacity, mathematical understanding, and organizational ability to coordinate massive labor forces over extended construction timelines. A society capable of building a functioning aqueduct system spanning dozens of miles, maintaining precise gradients across that entire distance using only period-appropriate surveying tools, was clearly capable of solving difficult engineering problems that required careful planning rather than modern technology. The counterargument isn't that Romans were incapable of impressive engineering, it's that surviving Roman construction records elsewhere, which are often remarkably thorough, don't include anything describing a project on quite this scale, using quite this method, anywhere else in their empire. If Roman engineers had developed a genuinely novel technique specifically capable of moving 750-ton stones, the complete absence of that technique being referenced, adapted, or reused at any other major Roman construction project anywhere else in their empire is, at minimum, a little unusual, particularly for an empire that was generally quite willing to document and reuse successful engineering solutions across different regions once they'd been proven to work. The case for a pre-existing, non-Roman foundation rests on a different kind of evidence, mostly stylistic and comparative. The stark visual contrast between the raw, massive, minimally decorated platform stones and the far more refined, decoratively carved architecture of the temple built on top of them has led some researchers to argue the two were never designed as a single unified project by a single culture, but rather represent two entirely different building traditions, separated by an unknown span of time, with Roman builders essentially inheriting and repurposing a foundation someone else had already constructed. Neither position has been definitively proven. Roman-era historical records that might settle the question definitively simply don't survive in enough detail to close the debate either way, which is precisely why serious researchers, not just fringe theorists, continue actively studying this specific question. It's worth being precise about what this debate actually is, and isn't, because it's frequently misrepresented in less careful coverage of this site. This isn't a fringe conspiracy theory floating entirely outside mainstream archaeology. Legitimate, credentialed researchers, publishing in genuine academic contexts, have raised real questions about the platform's construction timeline and authorship, based on measurable stylistic and technical evidence, not speculation about lost civilizations or ancient aliens. At the same time, it's equally important to be clear that the platform's origin is debated among serious researchers, is a considerably more modest, more careful claim than "this was definitely built by a lost advanced civilization," which is the version of this story that tends to dominate less rigorous corners of the internet. The honest state of the evidence sits somewhere in the middle, genuinely uncertain, actively researched, and not yet resolved in either direction, which is a more interesting place for a mystery to sit than a dramatic, unsupported claim in either direction would be. Some of the most careful recent scholarship on this question has focused not on grand theories, but on painstaking comparative analysis, examining tool marks left on the platform stones against tool marks confirmed to be from documented Roman quarrying elsewhere in the empire, looking for matches or mismatches in technique that might indicate whether the same workforce, using the same tools and methods, was responsible for both. That kind of granular, evidence-based comparison is slow, unglamorous work. It doesn't produce a dramatic documentary moment the way a bold claim about lost civilizations does. But it's exactly the kind of research that eventually moves genuine historical mysteries like this one closer to an actual answer, rather than further into speculation. Regardless of who ultimately gets credit for the engineering, the practical question of how remains genuinely unresolved, and researchers have proposed several serious methods over the decades. The most widely cited theory involves a combination of wooden rollers, sledges, and enormous coordinated teams of laborers using rope and leverage to gradually move each stone from the quarry to its final position, a method with real historical precedent. Since evidence exists of ancient societies moving comparably massive, if still somewhat smaller, stones using similar labor-intensive techniques, most famously at sites like Stonehenge and in ancient Egyptian construction projects. Other researchers have proposed the use of large-scale pulley and lever systems, potentially assisted by earthen embankments built up temporarily to reduce the effective lifting height required to raise each stone into its final position atop the wall, a technique that would have required precise engineering knowledge of load distribution, but doesn't require any technology beyond what's known to have existed in the ancient world. Both explanations share the same fundamental problem: neither has ever been definitively tested at this exact scale. Modern experimental archaeology has successfully demonstrated that surprisingly small teams of people, using clever leverage techniques, can move stones weighing tens of tons, genuinely impressive proof that ancient techniques were more capable than casual assumption gives them credit for. But nobody has ever successfully replicated moving and precisely placing a stone anywhere close to 750 tons using purely ancient methods, which leaves a real, unresolved gap between "this is plausible in theory" and "we've actually confirmed this is how it was done." There's a third, less commonly discussed theory worth mentioning as well. The possibility that the builders used a staged, multi-phase transport process rather than a single continuous method, potentially combining rollers for the flatter portions of the journey from quarry to temple site. Then switching to a lever and ramp system specifically for the final, most difficult stage of lifting each stone up onto the wall itself. This kind of hybrid approach, adapting technique to the specific challenge of each stage of the journey rather than relying on a single method throughout, would actually be consistent with what we know about sophisticated ancient engineering projects elsewhere in the world, where builders regularly combined multiple known techniques rather than relying on a single universal solution. What's genuinely striking, when you step back and consider all of these proposed methods together, is that none of them are individually implausible. Ancient societies demonstrably had access to rope, timber, coordinated human labor at scale, and reasonably sophisticated understanding of leverage and mechanical advantage. The difficulty isn't that any single piece of the puzzle seems impossible in isolation. It's that combining all of those pieces together, at this exact scale, with enough precision to place a 750-ton stone exactly where it needed to sit within a finished wall, represents an extraordinary cumulative engineering achievement, the kind that's far easier to propose in theory than to actually demonstrate has been replicated in practice. Recent research has focused specifically on the unmoved quarry stones, since they offer a rare opportunity to study an ancient stone cutting and extraction process frozen mid-completion rather than a finished result. Some newer studies examining tool marks and cutting techniques at the quarry site have offered fresh insight into exactly how the extraction process began. Even if the full transportation and placement method for the Trilithon stones that did get moved remains unconfirmed. Perhaps the most human question in this entire mystery isn't how these stones were meant to be moved, it's why the largest one, the stone of the pregnant woman, was left behind entirely, still partially attached to the bedrock it was cut from. A handful of practical explanations have been proposed. It's possible the stone cracked during the extraction process. Even a minor fracture in a block this size and this heavy would have made it structurally unsafe to move, forcing the project to be abandoned mid-cut rather than risk it failing catastrophically during transport. It's possible the engineering challenge simply proved greater than anticipated once workers attempted to actually separate and prepare the stone for transport, and the project was scaled back once the difficulty became clear. It's also possible that changing political, religious, or economic circumstances, a shift in imperial priorities, a funding shortfall, the death of whichever authority had commissioned the project, simply ended the work before it could be completed. The same way large infrastructure projects throughout history have sometimes been abandoned mid-construction when the political will or funding behind them changed. Whatever the reason, the abandoned stone offers something genuinely rare in archaeology, a direct, physical snapshot of an ancient engineering process interrupted mid-attempt, rather than a finished monument with all evidence of its construction process long since cleared away. In a strange way, the failure here tells us more about the actual limits of ancient engineering than the Trilithon's apparent success does, because it shows us, in physical form, exactly the scale at which this specific ancient building tradition seems to have finally met its match. Close examination of the abandoned stone offers a few additional clues worth mentioning. The cutting marks around its base show a clear, methodical extraction technique. Workers had cut channels around three sides of the block, undermining it gradually to eventually free it from the surrounding bedrock, the same basic technique used at other massive ancient quarries around the world. That the technique itself appears sound and deliberate, rather than experimental or improvised, suggests this wasn't a first attempt at extracting stone on this scale. The builders likely already had experience successfully extracting and moving the smaller, if still enormous, Trilithon stones by the time they attempted this significantly larger one. That detail actually deepens the mystery rather than resolving it. If these builders had already proven, through the successful placement of the Trilithon, that they possessed genuinely sophisticated stone-moving capability, what specifically made this next larger stone a bridge too far? Was it purely a matter of raw weight exceeding some functional limit of their transport method? Or did something else intervene, a structural flaw discovered mid-extraction, a change in who was funding or commissioning the project? A shift in the religious or political priorities that had justified this level of investment in the first place? The stone itself can't answer that question. It can only show us, with remarkable physical clarity, exactly the point at which the ambition of this project outran whatever capability or willpower had been sustaining it up to that moment. Given everything we've just covered, stones nearly 10 times heavier than anything used at the Great Pyramid, a genuine, still unresolved engineering and authorship debate. And one of the largest cut stones in human history sitting exactly where it was abandoned, it's worth asking why Baalbek doesn't occupy the same place in public awareness as Stonehenge or the pyramids. Part of the explanation is regional instability. Lebanon has experienced significant periods of conflict and political upheaval over the past half-century, which has, at various points, made large-scale international tourism and sustained archaeological access considerably more difficult than at more politically stable ancient sites elsewhere in the world. That disruption has real, measurable consequences for how much sustained media coverage, documentary production, and public visitation a site receives over time, regardless of how significant it actually is. Part of it is also a subtler branding problem. Sites like Stonehenge and the pyramids benefit from being singular, visually iconic, easily summarized in one image, a stone circle, a pyramid silhouette. Baalbek's most remarkable feature is comparatively less visually dramatic to someone glancing at a single photo. It's a wall, however staggering the individual stones within it actually are, embedded beneath a more conventionally recognizable Roman temple. The real mystery here requires context and scale comparison to fully appreciate. It's a story that rewards someone slowing down to actually learn the numbers, rather than a mystery that announces itself instantly in a single glance. That's precisely the gap a video like this one is meant to close. There's a useful comparison to draw here with how public fascination gets built around ancient sites more broadly. Stonehenge benefits enormously from a specific, repeatable visual, a ring of standing stones against an open sky, instantly recognizable, easy to photograph in a way that captures its essence in a single frame. The pyramids benefit from an even more extreme version of the same effect, a shape so simple and so massive that it communicates scale and mystery almost instantly, without requiring any accompanying explanation. Baalbek's most remarkable feature doesn't photograph itself the same way. A 300-ton stone embedded in a wall doesn't visually announce its own weight to a casual viewer scrolling past a photo online. You need the number attached, the comparison to a familiar object, the context of what you're actually looking at, before the scale actually registers. That's a real, structural disadvantage for building the kind of instant, viral public recognition that sites like Stonehenge have benefited from for centuries. It doesn't make Baalbek any less significant. It just makes it considerably harder to market at a glance, which, over enough decades, adds up to a meaningful gap in accumulated public awareness. Baalbek remains a UNESCO World Heritage Site today, and despite the region's periods of instability, it continues to draw researchers and visitors specifically because of the unresolved questions surrounding the platform stones. Ongoing archaeological and engineering research continues to study tool marks, quarrying techniques, and the geological composition of the site, in the hope of eventually narrowing down, with more confidence, exactly when and by whom the platform was actually constructed. The unmoved quarry stones remain exactly where they've always been, publicly accessible, remarkably well preserved given their exposure to over 2,000 years of weather, and still standing as the most direct physical evidence available anywhere in the world of just how far ancient engineers were willing to push the absolute limits of what was possible with the tools and techniques available to them. More than 2,000 years after these stones were cut, moved, and in some cases abandoned mid-project, Baalbek remains exactly what Mark Twain called it in the 19th century, a sealed book. Its full story still not entirely told. We know Rome built the temple. We're considerably less certain who built, or attempted to build, the platform beneath it, and precisely how they intended to move stones that modern engineering, even with all our accumulated technology, would still consider a genuinely serious challenge. Until that question is fully resolved, one of the largest hewn stones ever cut by human hands will keep sitting exactly where it was left, half buried in a Lebanese hillside, waiting for someone to finally finish an explanation that's been incomplete for 2,000 years. There's something quietly appropriate about a stone this size being the thing that outlasts every theory anyone has proposed to explain it. Empires have risen and fallen since it was cut. The religion it may have been intended to honor has been replaced by others, which were themselves eventually replaced again. Entire academic disciplines have formed, in part, around trying to answer questions this stone raises simply by existing. And through all of it, it hasn't moved an inch, still sitting in the exact spot where, for reasons we may never fully recover, someone 2,000 years ago decided the job wasn't worth finishing. If a mystery like this, real, physical, sitting in plain sight, and still genuinely unresolved even by professional archaeologists, is exactly the kind of thing you come to this channel for. Let me know in the comments whether you'd heard of Baalbek before today. And if you want more of the ancient world's hidden, forgotten, and genuinely unsolved locations, subscribe, there's another one waiting next week.